New York, 1976. The lights of Manhattan's clubs flicker as always, but something invisible is about to infiltrate the most close structure of organized crime. Joseph Pistone looks at himself in the mirror. He knows today could be his last day alive. Like yesterday. Like tomorrow. No one on the street recognizes him. No one knows he's about to make history. But he knows, and he also knows that if he makes a single mistake, he'll end up with a bullet in the back of his head and vanish forever. His real name, Joseph D. Pistone. His undercover identity, Donnie Brasco. He was the first FBI agent to infiltrate so deeply into the American Mafia. For nearly 6 years, between 1976 and 1981, he lived a double life. By day, he posed as a jewel thief. By night, he gathered evidence that would shake the foundations of the Cosa Nostra. Every day could be his last. And yet, Pistone never backed down. At that time, taking on the Mafia wasn't just a mission, it was suicide. The 5 families of New York, Bonanno, Colombo, Genovese, Lucchese, and Gambino, ruled the city with an iron fist. No one had ever managed to penetrate their inner circles. No one, until then. To achieve it, Joseph Pistone had to pay the highest price. He gave up his family, his name, his life. He first infiltrated the Colombos, and then earned his place within the feared Bonanno family, where they treated him as one of their own. Had they discovered him, they would have executed him without hesitation. But no one did. Because to them, Donnie Brasco was real. Not even many inside the FBI knew his real name. The operation was so secret that only a few knew the truth. To everyone else, Donnie was just another crook, another man of the Mafia. This is the true story of the agent who deceived the Mafia from within. A mission that would change the history of organized crime in America. And that, decades later, still keeps him awake at night. Before he became Donnie Brasco, before infiltrating the Mafia, Joseph D. Pistone was just a young man with Italian roots and a persistent dream to become an FBI agent. He was born on the 17th of September, 1939, in Pennsylvania, into a working-class family of Sicilian and Calabrian descent. When he was still young, he moved with his parents and siblings to the state of New Jersey, where his life seemed destined to be ordinary. In high school, he played basketball. He wasn't the tallest, about 6 feet, but he was fast and determined. He knew he'd never go professional, but the sport opened the doors to college. There, he studied social sciences, and at 20 years old, he married his girlfriend, a young nurse. Before long, he was the father of 2 daughters. Nothing in his surroundings suggested he would end up in the FBI. No one in his family had ever been a police officer. But since childhood, Joseph had known his purpose: to fight crime. It wasn't a romantic dream, but a conviction. During his final year at university, a friend suggested he take the police entrance exam. At first, he refused. He wanted to finish his studies, but they insisted so much that he accepted. He passed both the written and physical tests easily and applied for a part-time position. They said yes, but when the time came to take the oath, they denied him the post. Pistone refused to join under those terms. He stepped back, but only for a while. Soon after, he finished his degree and began teaching at a school. It was a stable, respectable job, but it wasn't what he had dreamed of. Then came a call that would change everything. An old acquaintance working for Naval Intelligence, the U.S. Navy's intelligence service, offered him a civilian position investigating crimes on naval bases. It was an environment very close to the FBI, too close to turn down. He took the exams and once again passed with ease. Thus began his career in intelligence, just as his family was growing with the birth of a 3rd daughter. Life seemed to be settling into stability. But Joseph Pistone was only getting started. For 3 years, he worked as a civilian agent in U.S. Naval Intelligence. He investigated drug cases, thefts, and military espionage. And with each mission, His name began to circulate in federal offices. Finally, the FBI called. It was his moment. On the 7th of July 1969, he took the oath and officially became a special agent of the FBI. His childhood dream had finally come true. From the very first day, Pistone knew what kind of agent he wanted to be. He wasn't interested in offices or desks. His place was on the street. He was assigned to the Jacksonville, Florida field office, where he hunted fugitives, dismantled illegal gambling rings, and caught bank robbery gangs. His humble background allowed him to move easily through the toughest neighborhoods. He knew how to read the streets. He knew how to speak their language. After 18 months, he was transferred to Alexandria, Virginia, where he spent another 4 years until, in 1974, he was sent to New York. There, in the Theft and Fencing Division, they intercepted between 6 and 7 truckloads of stolen goods every day. It was a city in full criminal bloom. That's when the first proposal came. The Bureau was investigating an organization specialized in stealing heavy machinery and luxury cars, and they needed someone who could infiltrate that world. The requirement was clear. Find an agent capable of operating heavy equipment, such as bulldozers or cargo trucks. Only a few fit that profile. Joseph Pistone was one of them. For that operation, he needed a new identity. And that's how Donnie Brasco was born, an improvised alias, taken from a movie or a book, he could never remember which, but one that would soon become legendary within the FBI. The mission was a complete success. More than 30 arrests, stolen vehicles, recovered worth over $1 million, and a letter of commendation signed by FBI Director Clarence Kelly himself, along with a $250 bonus. It was little money for the risk he had taken, but he had earned something far more valuable: prestige. He had proven he was more than just an agent. He was a natural-born infiltrator. And very soon, he would be entrusted with the most dangerous operation of his life, infiltrating the Mafia. For decades, the FBI had refused to work with undercover agents. J. Edgar Hoover, the all-powerful director of the Bureau, considered it a dirty, unworthy job that tarnished his men's reputations. But times had changed. By the mid-1972s, organized crime demanded new tactics. And after the success of the heavy machinery theft operation, it became clear that one undercover agent was worth more than 100 informants. Not just anyone could be the rat inside a criminal system. It required mental strength, self-control, cold blood, and, above all, an identity of steel. The undercover operative had to be able to stand alone, adapt to hostile environments, and move like a fish in water among killers, conmen, and thieves. But the most important thing, never forget who you are. Living among criminals can turn you into one of them, and once that line is crossed, it can no longer be blurred. In the spring of 1976, the FBI decided to take a step further. It was no longer just about dismantling bands of thieves. The objective now was to infiltrate the Mafia's distribution channels. The major fence networks for stolen goods, men who operated in restaurants, clubs, and bars, controlled directly by the Cosa Nostra. To achieve that, they needed someone with the perfect profile. Experienced in theft, able to move among toughs without arousing suspicion, and of Italian descent, to look like one of them. Joseph Pistone had it all. For the first time in its history, the FBI was going to infiltrate New York's Mafia directly, using one of its own agents. The plan was ambitious. And to execute it, Pistone decided to reclaim the name that had already brought him luck: Donnie Brasco. A fictional jewel thief, with no family, no past, nothing to tie him down. The perfect identity for someone who was about to disappear completely. Donnie Brasco was not just a name. It was a story, a past carefully constructed to withstand any scrutiny. Joseph Pistone knew this. If he was going to live among professional killers, he could not afford a single improvised detail. According to the fake files, Brasco was a jewel thief with experience in Miami and California. Single, an orphan, with no family, no verifiable past, a perfect profile, no ties, no witnesses, no one who could question his alibi. His specialty: non-violent, meticulously planned robberies. That way, he could explain why he worked alone, why no one knew him, and why he didn't need to use weapons or resort to chaos. Pistone already had experience with alarm systems and surveillance devices, but to be convincing as a jewelry expert, he needed something more. For 2 weeks, he trained discreetly at a jewelry store in New York. He learned how to identify stones, evaluate pieces, and speak the language of the trade. He didn't need to be a master, only sound authentic enough so that no mobster would doubt him. Once the documentation was ready, the proposal was sent to the FBI headquarters in Washington. The operation was approved, and with it, the erasure process began. Every trace of Joseph Pistone was eliminated. His office was emptied, his name vanished from internal records. His file was sealed and locked in a safe. If anyone asked about him, the answer was always the same. No one by that name has ever worked here. Not even his own family knew what he was about to do. They only knew he would disappear for work for a while, nothing more. Since April 1976, he had been preparing. But it wasn't until September that Pistone knew the time had come. He left his FBI desk, knowing he wouldn't return for many years. Friends, colleagues, routine, all left behind. He was about to dive into a parallel, clandestine life, where any mistake could cost him his life. Donnie Brasco wasn't a disguise. From now on, it would be his only reality. The immersion had begun. Joseph Pistone, and now officially Donnie Brasco, made a key decision: not to use informants. He didn't want anyone to be able to link him to the FBI. He had to do everything himself: rent an apartment, buy a car, open a bank account, all under his new identity. It was an operation without a safety net. His roadmap was clear: get in touch with the major Mafia fences, those who operated in restaurants, bars, and clubs in downtown and southern Manhattan. But for them to accept him, they first had to see him, get used to his presence. Brasco spent his days drinking alone, dining in silence, observing everything without saying a word to many. For 2 months, his only mission was to watch, to listen, and to remember. Every gesture, every face, every conversation. He didn't ask questions. He didn't volunteer. He didn't expose himself. His plan was simple: build a reputation as a serious, reserved, cautious man. Someone who knew how to move without making noise. And little by little, the strategy began to work. One of the places he frequented most was a restaurant called Chet Carmelo, owned by 2 members of the Genovese family. There, several Mafia associates gathered regularly, many of them engrossed in a dice game called backgammon. The bets were serious, $1,000 per game. It was the perfect setting to break the ice. But there was a problem. Donnie had no idea how to play. That's when he turned to an old friend, Chuck, another FBI agent who was infiltrated in the music scene. Chuck taught him the basic rules of the game. They played again and again, until Donnie felt confident enough to sit at a table with real mobsters and not look like an impostor. Because in that world, not knowing how to play could be as dangerous as not knowing how to lie. After learning the rules of the game, Donnie Brasco returned to Chet Carmelo and started playing backgammon with the regulars. For 2 or 3 weeks, he stayed consistent. Few words, good humor, respect. And it worked. The men began greeting him. They offered him a seat. They simply called him Don, a name that no longer sounded like an alias. It sounded like one of their own. Among the faces at the bar, one stood out: Marty, the bartender. He wasn't part of the Mafia, but he knew every move that happened in the place. Marty was discreet, clever, well-connected. And Donnie recognized it immediately. They started going out together, drinking, laughing, sharing stories. Little by little, Marty introduced him to his circle: low-level affiliates, small-time criminals who, even if they didn't yet treat him as an equal, at least acknowledged him. That's when Donnie made his next calculated move. He showed Marty a few fake stolen jewels and told him he wanted to sell them. It wasn't a direct proposal, it was a signal, an invitation. Marty didn't take the bait immediately, but he replied with interest. "When you've got more, let me know. I've got contacts. I could move some things." The door was open. But more would be needed to move forward. Meanwhile, Chuck, the FBI friend, still infiltrated in the music scene, was organizing a concert with James Brown as the headliner. During the planning, Chuck came into contact with two associates of the Colombo family, and he saw an opportunity. He invited Donnie to the event. There, he met Albert, a professional con artist tied to the Colombos. They began hanging out, drinking, doing business together. Donnie became his regular companion and soon decided to invite him to Ches Carmelo. Albert noticed that Donnie was well received at the place. That reinforced trust between them and, at the same time, strengthened Donnie's credibility in the eyes of others. Now, the men at the bar saw him alongside a real Mafia associate. He was no longer just a familiar face. He was someone with connections. But not everything was progress. It was December. Christmas was approaching, and Pistone, the real man behind the alias, could barely see his family. The more he earned the trust of the mob, the more he lost contact with his own. And that was only the beginning. The operation was moving forward. Donnie was gaining ground in the criminal world. But Joseph Pistone was starting to lose his family life. That Christmas, he only managed to spend a few hours in the morning with his wife and daughters. Then, he disappeared again. Work was everything, and the character he played was slowly consuming the man he truly was. In early 1977, Donnie went out partying with Albert at a nightclub frequented by criminals. There, Albert introduced him to a key figure, Gilly Greca, an associate of the Colombo family and one of the biggest distributors of stolen goods in Brooklyn. Greca wasn't a capo, not even a soldier, but he handled a significant volume of illegal business and had a loyal network of thieves and fences. That made him a direct gateway to the real world of the Mafia. A few days later, Donnie went to visit him at his shop. It was in a quiet area of Brooklyn, with a storefront full of designer clothes at ridiculously low prices. Everything was stolen. The shop served as a front, laundering goods and giving them an appearance of legitimacy. There, he met the rest of the group, thieves, hustlers, street enforcers, people from the streets, with no official rank in the Cosa Nostra, but well-connected, loyal, and dangerous. They accepted him without hesitation. Why? Because he already had references. Because they'd seen him with Albert. Because his presence at Che Carmelo had legitimized him. Thus, he began moving within Gilly Greca's circle, where every day brought new robberies, scams, and business deals of every kind. Their ambition was insatiable. These men never stopped. Day and night, they thought about how to get more, how to steal more, how to sell more. They knew no other way of life. One member of the group was named Vinny. He was a heavy-set man with a weak heart, but he still attended meetings, card games, and planning sessions. One afternoon, as they were discussing a new heist in the shop's back room, Vinny collapsed, and what happened next would change everything. In the middle of a card game, at the back of Gilly Greca's shop, Vinny, the overweight receptionist with heart problems, slumped over in his chair. He clutched his chest. His breathing grew heavy. "Hey, Vinny's in trouble. He's having a heart attack," shouted Donnie. But the others didn't move. "Bah, it happens to him all the time. Give him some pills, he'll be fine." No one helped him. For Donnie, letting a man die without doing anything wasn't an option. He lifted him up himself, put him in his car, and drove straight to the emergency room. Vinny survived. He had simply run out of medication. Hours later, they returned to the shop. The others were still playing cards as if nothing had happened. One of them smiled. "See? We told you. Everything was gonna be fine." On several occasions, members of the group invited Donnie to take part in armed robberies. But he always had an excuse ready. "No thanks. Using a gun's too cowboy for me." but if you need help unloading merchandise, I'm your guy. That attitude, far from raising suspicion, earned him respect. After all, fewer people in on the heist meant more money to share. From time to time, he'd sit with them and review their robbery plans. He'd point out mistakes, risks, weaknesses in surveillance. He never exposed himself, but he made it clear that he knew what he was talking about. Even so, the tension didn't go away. One afternoon, while driving with Guido, Gilly's lieutenant, a cold, violent man with blood on his hands, the inevitable happened. Guido told him to pull over. Then, without saying a word, pulled out a tool and started dismantling the dashboard. He was looking for a microphone, a piece of evidence, a betrayal, an excuse to kill. In 5 minutes, he had taken the whole thing apart. He found nothing. Donnie knew. Sooner or later, they'd check him. That's why he had never hidden any devices in his car. His foresight saved his life. Guido went back to his seat, as if nothing had happened. And Donnie kept driving. Silence, wet streets, racing hearts. He had passed another test, but each day brought him closer to the edge. For weeks, Donnie Brasco kept a low profile. He watched, listened, participated just enough. But he understood something crucial. Mordes. To survive in that world, you had to move. So he started doing what any thief would do. Buying and selling stolen goods. He bought watches and jewelry from members of the crew, especially Vinny, and then resold other pieces that, in reality, came from FBI seizures. They believed it was loot from their own robberies. That gave him prestige, credibility, an aura of professionalism without arousing suspicion. Donnie had a clear goal: to connect with the major fences, the men who really pulled the strings of the business. But every time he asked to be introduced, the answer was always the same. You just give us the stuff. We'll pass it on to the guy. Don't worry. It was an elegant way of keeping him away from the real core. But Donnie knew it was only a matter of time. Meanwhile, inside the crew, someone else was fulfilling his own dream. In May 1977, Gilly Greca was officially made a soldier in the Colombo family. He was no longer just an associate. He was now a formal member of the Cosa Nostra. Becoming made was the highest honor for an Italian mobster. It meant you had been accepted by the capos, and the organization recognized you as one of its own. They gave you a territory. They protected you. And in return, they demanded absolute loyalty. The Mafia had your back, but it also bound you for life. Gilly said it proudly. This is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. I waited my whole life for this moment. Maybe one day, you'll understand what it feels like. Donnie Brasco didn't answer. But deep down, he knew that this ceremony sealed more than just loyalty. It was one step further into the abyss. Now, Gilly was a soldier under Charlie Moose Panarella, one of the most respected capos of the Colombo family. And Donnie kept climbing. Deeper, closer, more exposed. The atmosphere had changed. 2 longtime members of Gilly's crew, Frankie and Patsy, had just been released from prison, experts in daylight robberies, violent, suspicious men with years behind bars, and sharp instincts for spotting intruders. From the very first moment, they didn't like what they saw. One day, Donnie walked into the store as usual. But this time, no one greeted him. Not a glance, not a word. Gilly grabbed him by the arm and led him outside. Don't take it the wrong way, but Patsy and Frankie have doubts about you. What kind of doubts? They say they don't know you well enough. They want you to stay out of business until someone from Miami confirms you're legit. Someone who says he's done jobs with you. Donnie snapped. No way, I'm not giving names to anyone. Gilly tried to calm him down. They went back inside and arranged a meeting with Frankie and Patsy to clear things up. 1 table, 3 men with criminal pasts, and 1 man with a double life. Gilly broke the silence. I hear you've got a problem. That true? Patsy spoke first. You say you did a lot of jobs in Miami, but nobody can confirm it. And besides, You talk too much when we're discussing serious business. In that world, distrust wasn't just a problem. It was a death sentence. Donnie knew it. And he understood that if he didn't resolve the situation right there at the table, he wouldn't be walking out of there. We want a name, Donnie. Someone who can say, you actually did those jobs in Miami. You don't need to check anything. I'm not here to satisfy the whims of two guys just out of prison. What if you're a rat, a damn infiltrator? That's why we want to verify. Then Patsy pulled out a gun. A .32 caliber automatic. He placed it on the table with the calm of a man who had already made his decision. You're not leaving here until you give us a name. If you refuse, you'll leave wrapped in a rug. The air turned suffocating. Donnie knew the moment he feared most had arrived. And he also knew he had an out. If it worked, he had prepared for this. If he were ever cornered, he would give the name of a federal undercover informant in Miami. A former thief who worked with the FBI and who had been briefed to confirm Donnie's story if anyone asked about him. Gilly stepped in to ease the tension. Come on, Don. Let them contact someone. After that, everything will go back to normal. Donnie agreed. But inside, he trembled. The informant had to be available. He had to remember the protocol. And he had to do it right. Because if it failed, they'd kill him right there. Patsy stood up and went to make the call. Donnie remained alone with the others, in complete silence, watching them play cards, as if nothing had happened, as if they didn't have a man with a death sentence hanging over him right in front of them. Minutes passed. Then, hours. Every second was a countdown. Sweat, a racing heart, thoughts spinning like a roulette wheel. At 4:30 p.m., Patsy came back. He looked at Donnie, smiled slightly. It's all good. You're legit. Donnie Brasco had just survived the most dangerous test of his life so far. He had been minutes away from execution. But his cover remained intact. And now, it was time to move to the next level, the Bonanno family. The door to the Bonanno family opened on an ordinary night, in an ordinary nightclub. It was Albert the Colombo contact who introduced him to a man with a hard stare and a bloody past. Anthony Mirra, newly released after serving 18 years in prison for drug trafficking. Mirra was no ordinary mobster. He was a professional killer with at least 25 murders to his name. Unpredictable, violent, respected and feared even within the Mafia itself. Donnie understood he had to approach him with extreme caution. They began seeing each other often, first at parties, then out on the street. Soon after, Mirra invited him to his territory, Little Italy, in the heart of Manhattan. There, between stale coffee and worn-out bar stools, he met another key name, Benjamin Lefty Guns Ruggiero. Lefty was a veteran of the Bonanno family. He was 50 years old, with a dark past. His nickname wasn't random. He had killed more than a dozen men with his own hands. He owned a small club near Mirra's bar, and soon, Donnie started spending time with them both. Now, his time was divided between two worlds. Brooklyn, with Gilly Greca's crew, and Little Italy, with real soldiers from one of the 5 Mafia families. By mid-1977, the FBI already had enough evidence to take down Gilly's gang. But the real target remained out of reach. The major fences operating under the Mafia's umbrella. Donnie was getting closer to them, but not yet deep enough inside. So a key decision was made. Abandon the Colombo lead and focus entirely on the Bonanno family. By August, Brasco had fully settled in Little Italy. It was his new field of operations. At that time, New York was divided among 5 Mafia families. The Bonanno, now Donnie's direct target. The Colombo, where the infiltration began. The Gambino, led by Paul Castellano. The Genovese, headed by Philip Lombardo. And the Lucchese, with Anthony Corallo as boss. Officially, the Bonanno were led by Philip Rusty Rastelli. But in practice, power belonged to another feared name, Carmine Galante. And Donnie Brasco was about to enter his world. The structure was rigid, hierarchical, and deadly. At the top, the boss. Then the sotocapo, underboss, ready to take the throne if the boss was imprisoned. The consigliere, a quiet and calculating advisor. The capos, commanding entire crews of soldiers. And at the base, the soldiers' killers, extortionists, and traffickers. Orbiting around them were the associates, like Donnie, for now. Any deviation from the rules was paid for with one's life. And Donnie knew it. Little by little, he began to earn their trust. Especially Mirra's, though dealing with him was anything but easy. Short-tempered, unstable, impossible to predict. But Donnie endured. And over time, Mirra introduced him to other soldiers. The circle was tightening. When Mirra wasn't around, Donnie spent his days at Lefty Ruggiero's club in Italy. They talked about sports, gambling, boxing, horse races, the kind of small talk that filled a mobster's day. And without realizing it, Lefty began to see him as a real partner. Donnie, he called him. Soon enough, everyone else started calling him that too. Lefty managed illegal betting operations for the Bonanno family's number 2, Nicky Marangelo. He wanted Donnie to work with him. And that's how the undercover agent began to take part in the family's real business. Both Lefty and Mirra were soldiers, under different capos. One answered to Mickey Zaffarano, the other to Mike Sabella. But in personality, they were complete opposites. Mirra was pure threat. Lefty, on the other hand, was talkative, anxious, a gambling addict but less violent. During a visit to Marangello's office, Mirra revealed something Donnie didn't know. The existence of a secret group called the Zips. They were Sicilians brought directly from Italy by Carmine Galante for 2 purposes: to distribute heroin and to carry out assassinations on demand. They had no papers. They weren't on any record. They were deadly ghosts serving the Mafia. With that revelation, Donnie realized that what he had seen so far was only the surface. They called themselves the Zips. Sicilians brought directly from Italy on Carmine Galante's orders. They had no papers. They didn't show up in any police records. They met in discreet pizzerias to move heroin, launder money, or simply to wait for the next order. But they weren't just messengers. They were hitmen. Clean shots, mission accomplished, total silence. While the American soldiers avoided touching judges or cops out of respect for the rules, the Zips had no limits. Donnie collected everything he could about them and sent it to the FBI. Because he knew those men were not mere pawns. They were key pieces in an international criminal network. Then the dilemma came. Mirra and Lefty hated each other. Both saw Donnie as a source of income. And that made them jealous, competitive, dangerous. Donnie knew that sooner or later he would have to choose one or the other. But it wasn't necessary. One day, he arrived at Lefty's club and found him on the phone with Jilly. He hung up. And days later, he delivered the news. As of today, you work for me. You're now an associate of the Bonanno family. Lefty wasted no time. He began his education. He ordered him to shave his mustache. He made clear that he now answered to him. If he wanted to leave the city, he had to ask permission. If he made money, he had to split it with him. And above all, he had to stay available, always. But there was more. Something Donnie had to decide for himself. What would he do if he witnessed a murder? As an FBI agent, he couldn't allow it. But as an undercover mafioso, intervening would mean death. He made a decision. If it was a mobster who was going to die, he would do nothing. If it was an innocent person, he'd risk his life to stop it. By the summer of 1977, Donnie was already one of them. He knew key figures from every family. He had built ties with Joey Massino, who was rising fast within the Bonanno ranks. He knew Nicky Santora, Al Walker, and other heavy hitters. And most importantly, his reputation was starting to serve the FBI. In Milwaukee, the FBI was working to dismantle a local boss. They needed help, and they turned to the man who already had the trust of the New York Mafia, Donnie Brasco. In Milwaukee, the FBI was trying to take down the local mafia, led by the powerful Frank Balistrieri. They had launched an undercover operation, but results weren't coming. The criminal family seemed untouchable. That's when they contacted me. They wanted me to assist an agent already undercover, a man named Tony Conte. His cover was that of a businessman looking to install a network of slot machines in bars and clubs around the city. The strategy was clear. If Balistrieri tried to push him out of business through intimidation, we could charge him with extortion. But there was a problem. For months, Conte hadn't managed to install a single machine. Balistrieri's grip on Milwaukee was so tight that no business owner dared take the deal. That's where I came in. The FBI needed me to activate my New York contacts to connect Conte with the Bonanno family. The idea was simple: get a respected mobster to back the business, creating a link between New York and Milwaukee. That way, Balistrieri would be forced to negotiate and expose himself. I immediately thought of Lefty. I pitched the deal to him as easy money. A friend of mine wanted to invest in vending machines in Milwaukee, and there was a fortune to be made. Money was Lefty's language, and he took the bait without hesitation. Once Lefty was in, the next step was to get approval from above. His direct capo, Mike Sabella, and Carmine Galante himself, boss of the Bonanno family. Lefty spoke with them. Days later, we had the green light. A meeting was arranged between representatives of the Milwaukee Mafia and the Bonanno family. Everything went as planned. An alliance was sealed between the two families. A real, operational pact. We were in. The result was overwhelming. We had managed to infiltrate two mafia families, and were now officially connected to a godfather. It was a perfect move. Thanks to that alliance, Conte and I gathered enough evidence to charge Frank Balistrieri with extortion. The boss had unknowingly signed a secret deal with the FBI, a contract that, between the lines, committed him to eliminating any competition in his territory. Exactly the evidence we needed to take him down. After sealing the alliance with Milwaukee, our mission entered a new phase. Gathering proof about Balistrieri's parallel operations. Illegal gambling, labor racketeering, organized extortion. But something changed. All of a sudden, Balistrieri stopped responding. He avoided Conte. Calls went unanswered. The tone turned cold. Everything pointed to one thing. He had learned something. Maybe an indictment. Maybe a suspicion. It was time to shut the operation down. So we packed up and left Milwaukee. A few days later, in July 1979, I got a call from Lefty. "Buy the paper. You're gonna freak out." I did, and there it was. Carmine Galante, boss of the Bonanno family, executed in broad daylight. His body lay on the terrace of an Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, bathed in blood, the cigar still in his mouth. The image spread across the country. I called Lefty. "So what happens to us now?" "That's not something we talk about on the phone. Get over here." I went to see him. The power structure had changed. Rusty Rastelli, from prison, had been declared the new boss. Mike Sabella, Lefty's capo, had been demoted. Now we answered to Sonny Black. The new captain, a man from Brooklyn named Dominic Napolitano. I didn't know him. He'd been in prison when I started the mission. But soon, I'd become very close to him. Despite the internal earthquake, the operation continued. Lefty and I often traveled to Miami, betting on horse races, greyhound tracks, chasing business opportunities. We moved like two legitimate partners, always looking for the next score. Miami, like Las Vegas, was open territory. All families could operate there, as long as they didn't cross certain lines. It was a land of opportunity and danger. One day, the FBI contacted me. They wanted me to take part in a new operation in Florida. The goal? To support an undercover agent working under the alias Tony Rossi. And so began a new phase. In a new territory, with new rules, and even more unpredictable enemies. Tony Rossi, the undercover agent in Florida, had managed to infiltrate the illegal gambling scene with a very clear objective: to get close to Santo Trafficante Jr., the ultimate mafia boss in the state. Trafficante wasn't just any mobster. He had run casinos in Havana before the Cuban Revolution, and it was said he'd collaborated with the CIA in a plot to assassinate Fidel Castro. He had power, history, and a network that stretched from Tampa to New York. Rossi managed to connect with his people and began working by protecting underground card games. But progress was slow. Weeks went by with no results. Access to Trafficante remained closed. The FBI then made a bold move: to open its own nightclub in Florida. They found the perfect spot in northeast Tampa. They called it King's Court. Rossi would appear as the owner, and the place was completely renovated. The goal was simple: attract local mobsters with high-stakes games. But the plan wasn't working. That's when they called me. They wanted me to involve the Bonanno family. If they could connect the Trafficante organization with the Bonannos through a joint business, it would open a direct channel to record real conversations, deals, and movements. For the FBI, and for the family, it would be a goldmine. I agreed. My role was to prepare the ground, to convince Lefty that the club was a legitimate investment and profit opportunity. But just as we were about to begin, there was an unexpected twist. The FBI informed me that I had to withdraw from the operation. The reason: Balistrieri, the Milwaukee boss, had discovered that Tony Conte was an undercover agent. That explained why he had cut off all contact. And the most dangerous part was that, under Mafia rules, he was required to inform the Bonanno family. If he did, I was dead. Despite the risk, I insisted on continuing. After intense internal negotiations, I was given the green light to proceed. But the tension was unbearable. I knew that at any moment, the information could leak, and I'd end up with a bullet in my head. Between autumn 1979 and February 1980, I began carefully talking to Lefty about the club. My goal was for the Bonannos to do business with the Trafficante family inside the King's Court, where everything would be under FBI surveillance. In March, Lefty flew to Florida to visit the club for the first time. Rossi and I picked him up at the airport, then took him to lunch at a Greek restaurant. During lunch, Rossi talked about his business, pretending he needed investors. It was all part of the plan, to show that the club made money, had growth potential, and that partnering with Rossi was a great opportunity. We knew that if Lefty got involved, Sonny Black would follow. And if Sonny Black got involved, the connection with Trafficante would be inevitable. We were about to connect two criminal worlds in one place. And all of it under the eyes of the FBI. A week later, the plan was sealed. Lefty spoke with Sonny Black, and the Bonanno family decided to invest officially in the King's Court, Rossi's club. Exactly as we had planned. The place was outfitted with the full FBI arsenal. Hidden cameras, microphones, recorders. Every corner was monitored. Every word recorded. The club was no longer just a front. It was a precision-built trap. Sonny Black was thrilled with the results. He regularly flew down from New York to Florida to oversee operations. And on one of those visits, he said what we'd been waiting months to hear. "I want to meet Santo Trafficante." That was it. The direct contact point. And the FBI desperately needed it. Lefty handled the arrangements through intermediaries. Finally, the call came. The meeting was set. Greek restaurant, 8 p.m. The FBI deployed a full unit around the area. Long-range cameras, mobile surveillance, everything was ready. The meeting went off seemingly without a hitch. When it ended, Sonny Black said to me, "It went perfect. We talked business, and about a bingo operation that starts tomorrow." The connection was sealed. Trafficantes emissary, Benny Husick, met with Sonny Black that same day to find a suitable location. The machinery was in motion, and the plan had worked. We had officially linked the Bonanno and Trafficante families, and the entire operation was documented from the inside. But just when it seemed we'd reached the mission's highest point, something changed. One ordinary afternoon, in the middle of a casual conversation, Sonny stared straight at me. "Donnie, tell me something. Have you ever killed anyone?" Silence. I smiled, not knowing if it was a test, a provocation, or a death sentence. "Well, we'll see." One night, while dining with Sonny Black and his Lieutenant John Booby Kerasani at a Brooklyn restaurant, Sonny congratulated me. He told me that what I was doing in Florida with Rossi was exceptional, and that if things kept going that way, I could soon become a made man, a real member of the Cosa Nostra. No FBI agent had ever come this far. If I made it, it wouldn't just be an operational victory. It would be a historic blow to the Mafia from the inside. But then, everything began to fall apart. Conversations in meetings shifted in tone. There was tension, careful looks, and names that kept coming up again and again. The Bonanno family was divided. On one side, the group I belonged to, Rusty Rastelli, Consigliere Steve Canone, and Capos Sonny Black and Joe Massino. On the other side, a rival faction led by Capos, Cesare Bonventre, Philip Philly Lucky, Giacone, Dominic Big Trin, Trinchera, Alphonse Sonny Red, Indelicato, and his son, Bruno. It all went back to Galante's death. Both sides wanted control. What had started as an internal dispute was about to become a war. At first, they tried to avoid it. A meeting between both factions was scheduled to find a solution. But the first one was cancelled. And at the second, it exploded. On the 5th of May 1981, Sonny Red, Philly Lucky, and Big Trin arrived at a restaurant in Brooklyn. They came intending to negotiate peace. But it was a trap. As they entered a back room, several armed men emerged from closets where they had been hiding and riddled them with bullets. According to the later investigation, among those involved were Sonny Black, Booby Terasani, Joe Massino, and at least 6 other Bonanno members. The bodies were buried in a vacant lot. The opposition to Rusty Rastelli and Sonny Black had been eliminated. Almost. One remained, Bruno Indelicato, Sonny Red's son, the only one not present that night. Days later, I got a message from Sonny Black. He wanted to talk in private. It had only been a few days since the massacre, and I didn't know if that important meeting was actually an ambush to execute me. The FBI agents were on high alert. They feared I was walking into a trap. So did I. But deep down, something told me it wasn't. I went to the bar where I was supposed to meet Sonny Black. He was there, calm, relaxed. He talked about Bruno Indelicato, Sonny Red's son, the only one not present at the meeting where his father was executed, the one who was still alive. And then he said it, almost casually, as if assigning a routine task. He gave me the order to kill him. A contract, one more step toward becoming a made man. For Sonny, it was a test of trust, a point in my favor when he put my name forward. But for me, it was a line I couldn't cross. As an FBI agent, I couldn't take part in a murder. But as an undercover mobster, refusing meant exposing myself. Legally, since I wasn't yet made, I could decline the order without consequence. But after 5 years earning their respect, saying no would have been betraying everything I'd built. And I knew it well. If I didn't do it, someone else would. Days went by. I kept up the act, preparing as if I really intended to carry out the hit. But then, the FBI said enough. The police had found Sonny Red's body. Its discovery triggered a wave of tension in the streets. The war within the Bonanno family was no longer a threat. It was a fact. And I, standing beside Sonny Black with a pending murder, had become a perfect target. The FBI decided to shut down the operation. For me, it was devastating. I was about to reach the highest point of infiltration. To become an official soldier, an undercover agent turned man of honor. to prove to the world that the Mafia could be beaten from within. I was even set to become Sonny Black's right-hand man, serving as a bridge for new business with other families. But the risk was too great. They made it clear. It had to end. After almost 6 years undercover, the date was set. The 26th of July 1981. That day, Donnie Brasco would disappear, and Joseph Pistone would resurface. Just a few weeks remained before my role as Donnie Brasco came to an end. In one of our last conversations, Sonny Black spoke to me about the old man. He meant Rusty Rastelli, the boss of the Bonanno family, still serving time in prison. He didn't know that what was coming would change his life and mine. The day came. 3 federal agents showed up at one of Sonny's establishments. They showed him a photograph. In it, I appeared Donnie Brasco, standing with those same 3 agents. Sonny looked at the picture. No reaction. No gesture. No word. Then he simply said, "I understand." The news hit like a bomb. Sonny immediately called together his closest men, Lefty, Booby, and Nicky Santora. He explained what had happened, but refused to believe it. He can't be a federal agent. If he is, then they kidnapped him, or brainwashed him. For more than a week, they searched for me all over the country, without rest, without finding anything. And they couldn't find me. My family and I were already on the other side of the country, on the West Coast, under new names, protected by the FBI. Our house had a special security system. No one knew where we were, but my identity was no longer a secret. Joseph D. Pistone, a.k.a. Donnie Brasco, appeared in headlines across the United States. The operation had been revealed to the world. I remember the tears of my daughters when they found out. The fear in my grandfather's eyes every time he started the car. The weight of what I had done. 10 days passed, and then Sonny Black accepted the truth. It was time to report to the higher-ups. He first called Santo Trafficante, then Rusty Rastelli. Finally, he informed Paul Castellano, the powerful boss of the Gambino family. The capos of the Cosa Nostra gathered in New York. They wanted to assess the damage. Photographs of me were printed and distributed across the country. They wanted to find me. They wanted revenge. A $500,000 bounty was placed on my head. The FBI knew my life was in danger. To contain the Mafia's fury, they sent agents to speak directly to the heads of each family. They told them what they needed to hear. Don't touch him. He beat you. It's over. And if anyone dared to cross that line, the full weight of U.S. justice would fall upon them. But the balance was fragile. On the 14th of August 1981, exactly 17 days after my identity was made public, the heads of the Cosa Nostra called a meeting. Sonny Black was summoned. The meeting took place in New Jersey. He knew he wouldn't walk out alive. And he didn't. He was never seen again. He had paid with his life for trusting me, for opening the door to me, for treating me like a brother. Lefty Ruggiero was the only one we knew the Mafia had put a price on. So he was the only one we protected. A month later, I met Sonny's girlfriend at a hotel restaurant. The place was heavily monitored by federal agents. She didn't know anything. She was still waiting for news. She was broken inside. During the conversation, she told me, "Do you know what Sonny said about you?" He said, "I really liked that guy. It broke me to know he was an agent. But that doesn't change how I feel. He did his job. And he did it well." 98. On the 2nd of August 1982, I took the stand. It was a historic trial. For the first time, a group of made men were brought to justice, thanks to an undercover infiltration. That day, the courtroom was full. Reporters, photographers, an expectant public. Across from me, in the defendant's dock, sat 5 men. Lefty Ruggiero, Bubi Terasani, Nicky Santora, and 2 other family members. I looked at them, and I knew that, even if they hated me. They also knew I had beaten them from the inside. From the witness stand, I watched them closely. The 5 mobsters stared at me in disbelief, especially Lefty Ruggiero, who couldn't accept the truth. To his lawyer, he had said, "He will never testify against us." But in time, even he accepted it. Alone, in his cell, between court appearances. Meanwhile, I didn't stop. I worked shoulder to shoulder with prosecutors to prepare charges of extortion, illegal gambling, murder, and organized crime. Not only in New York, but also in Milwaukee, Tampa, and Kansas City. The evidence I collected over those 6 years proved crucial for the U.S. justice system. I testified for months, and the outcome was clear. More than 100 convictions. 100. A number that had seemed impossible. But there it was, documented, sealed in the courts. I'm often asked if those 6 years changed me. The truth is no. I never lost who I was, nor did I struggle to leave Donnie Brasco behind. The uniform, the gestures, the attitude, it was only a mask. I never confused myself. Would I do it again? Professionally, without hesitation. Personally, that's another story. I lost 10 years of my family life. 10 years in which my daughters grew up without me. Years spent living under another identity, in another world. And sometimes, I wonder if it was worth it. I remember, at the end of one of the New York trials, a defense attorney approached me. He didn't have to, but he did. He looked me in the eyes and said, "You did one hell of a job, pal. You've got a pair of brass balls, Agent Pistone." After 17 years of service, Joseph D. Pistone officially resigned from the FBI in 1986. Despite the historic impact of his infiltration, he never entered the witness protection program. He continued living under low-profile identities, but never completely disappeared. His official reward for the operation was just $500. However, the blow he delivered was so devastating that the Cosa Nostra expelled the Bonanno family from the commission and forever changed some of its internal rules. From then on, to be accepted as made, every candidate had to prove his loyalty by killing someone, and he had to be sponsored by a member who had known him since childhood. Pistone continued to work with justice. He played a key role in high-profile cases like the Pizza Connection, which dismantled one of the world's largest heroin networks, and the Commission trial, which exposed the 5 major New York families. Today, Joseph Pistone is 83 years old. He lives in anonymity with his wife and 3 daughters. The $500,000 contract on his head is still active. What about the others? Lefty Ruggiero, sentenced to 20 years, died 1 year after release from cancer. Sonny Black Napolitano, executed by the Mafia. Body found a year later, hands cut off. Anthony Mirra, killed in 1982, deemed a traitor for introducing Donnie. Gilly Greca, murdered in Brooklyn in 1980. Paul Castellano, executed in 1985. Joe Massino, Carmine Persico, Anthony Coraglio, and others sentenced to long terms or life imprisonment. Rusty Rastelli, sentenced to 12 years. Trafficante, indicted, died in 1987. Over 100 convictions in total, from New York to Tampa, through Milwaukee and Kansas City. And so ends the story of Donnie Brasco, the agent who infiltrated the very heart of the Mafia, and forever changed the way the FBI fights organized crime. A story of double life, betrayal, sacrifice, and an operation so dangerous that even today, it still commands respect and fear. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to leave a like, share it, and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss more real-life stories like this one. Your support is the best way for us to keep creating high-quality documentary